By the early 1900s, China, a great ancient nation with a civilization spanning 4,000 years, was weakening from internal and external pressures. The ruling Qing monarchy had experienced many regional uprisings that caused a heavy loss of lives and property. China had also suffered many cataclysmic famines that caused 120 million deaths. But China's greatest challenge, one that threatened its very own survival, came from outside its borders, the European powers, United States and Japan. By 1898, China's territorial integrity itself was severely compromised, with foreign powers establishing spheres of influence in large parts of China. By 1900, China appeared verging on being partitioned by the foreign powers. In the late 1800s, a Chinese secret society, the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, was formed comprising mostly young peasants in the remote regions of Shandong and Zili provinces. The foreigners soon called the group Boxers, as sect members practiced martial arts and gymnastics. The Boxers were fiercely anti-foreigner and anti-Christian, and believed that China's problems were caused by the foreigners, who had brought into China their alien culture and religion. The Qing government also distrusted the Boxers, viewing them as potentially rebellious, and tried to crush them. However, the Boxers' grassroots organizational structure made their suppression difficult. By April to May 1900, the Boxers had expanded into large areas of northern China, targeting Chinese Christians. And by June 1900, the Boxers were in the vicinities of Beijing, the nation's capital, and Tianjin, aimed at attacking the foreign enclaves in those cities. Just outside Beijing, in June 1900, the Boxers went on a rampage, attacking villages, killing local officials, and destroying public infrastructures. The international community, which mostly comprised diplomats, their staff and families, were alarmed at the escalating violence, and upon a request to the Qing government, were allowed to deploy international troops to protect the Legation Quarter. On May 31, 1900, some 400 soldiers arrived, but further requests for more troops were refused by the Qing. And with the Qing government denying the diplomatic missions use of the telegraph facilities, by mid-June 1900, the Legation Quarter was cut off from the outside world. On June 13, 1900, thousands of Boxers stormed into Beijing, targeting Chinese Christians, burning churches, destroying homes, and looting properties. Fighting broke out between Legation forces and Boxers, who were joined by anti-foreigner Qing forces. By then, the Legation Quarter was fortified with barricades, trenches, and bunkers in preparation for a siege. Also at the Northern Cathedral, located 3 miles from the Legation Quarter, Catholic clergy, Chinese Christians, and international troops turned the refuge into a defensive fortification that would also come under siege. On June 10, 1900, a relief force sent out to Beijing was repelled and forced to turn back. As in Beijing, on June 15, 1900, the Boxers set upon Tianjin, rampaging into the Chinese section and targeting Chinese Christians. On June 16, the Boxers attacked the international settlement, home to some 700 expatriates and which had been bolstered by the arrival of 2,400 international troops. The Boxers were repulsed, who then laid siege and cut communication and supply lines, isolating the international settlement. On June 15, 1900, at the Yellow Sea, Alliance naval commanders became alarmed when Qing forces began fortifying the Taku Forts, which would cut off the international communities in Tianjin, Beijing, and the trapped relief force, all of whom they had had no communication for several days. On June 17, 1900, Alliance forces attacked and seized control of the forts. For the Qing government in Beijing, the attack on the Taku Forts was an act of war. On June 21, 1900, the Qing court issued a series of decrees which the foreign powers viewed as a declaration of war. Consequently, a de facto state of war existed between the Qing and the international powers. Furthermore, where previously the Qing government had vacillated on its position regarding the Boxers, it now turned firmly in support of them and incorporated the Boxers as an auxiliary force of the Chinese army. In Beijing, Qing and Boxer forces laid siege to the Legation Quarter and tried first to burn out the foreigners, which was foiled. Heavy fighting took place, and Chinese artillery pounded the legations. The attackers built barricades, with which they gradually inched closer to the legations. Sappers also dug an underground tunnel and detonated mines under the French legation. By the end of the siege, these operations had nearly succeeded in bringing down the legations. Similarly in Tianjin, Qing Boxer forces laid siege to the international settlement, pounding the foreigners with artillery shells and also launching human wave attacks. As in Beijing, the greatest danger to the international settlements was a massive all-out attack by the Qing army. In theory, the international troops in Beijing and Tianjin did not stand a chance, as they faced tens of thousands of Chinese forces. However, the Qing's resolve in the war was indecisive and compromised for the following reasons. 1. The Qing's war effort did not gain wide support, particularly in the majority Han population who viewed the Manchu Qing as a foreign power. 2. Regional warlords and administrators did not heed the Qing's call to take up arms and even signed separate treaties with the foreign powers. 3. Even the Qing government was divided by the war, despite Empress Dowager Cixi's decision to support the Boxers. 4. General Ronglu, the commander of all imperial forces, opposed the war, believing that China was incapable of taking any of the foreign powers head-on in war, let alone fighting the alliance forces simultaneously. 5. The international powers also warned China of the consequences, this veiled threat forcing the Qing to tone down its hardline rhetoric and even agree to a ceasefire, thereby allowing respite to the beleaguered international communities. Through Chinese couriers, the international community in Tianjin appealed to the international navies to send more troops to Tianjin. The alliance counteroffensive envisioned first capturing Tianjin and then advancing to Beijing. On June 23, 1900, 5,000 foreign troops reached Tianjin and expelled the Boxers from the international settlement, ending the siege. 3 days later, the alliance rescued Seymour's force at Taku Fort. The alliance continued its force build-up by July 1900, numbering some 20,000 troops in Tianjin and Taku, and also fully restoring rail communication and supply lines to the coast. On July 13, 1900, alliance forces seized the walled city of Tianjin, breaking through the Chinese defenses in the bloodiest battle of the war. On August 4, 1900, alliance forces then advanced to Beijing, although fearing that their countrymen, if not already wiped out, likely faced grave danger because of the recent allied victories in Taku and Tianjin, and that an alliance attack on Beijing could only worsen the situation for the Legation Quarter. On August 5, 1900, the alliance broke through at Beikang, forcing Qing units to retreat. On August 6 at Yangkan, both sides clashed again, with the alliance forcing Qing forces to retreat in disarray with heavy casualties. Alliance forces then advanced through the Peiho River and in a number of battles threw back repeated Qing counteroffensives while also wreaking havoc on Boxer-held villages along the river banks. Alliance forces soon reached Tangzhou and on August 14, 1900, advanced on 4 sectors into Beijing, taking the capital that same day and ending the 55-day siege of the Legation Quarter. On August 16, Alliance forces ended the siege of the Northern Cathedral. In the aftermath, the Alliance divided Beijing into separate zones of occupation where martial law was imposed. As the Boxers still posed a threat to Beijing, Alliance forces expanded their operations, causing extensive death and destruction in the countryside. On August 15, 1900, in the midst of the Alliance attack on Beijing, the Qing court had escaped, eventually settling in distant Shanxi province. As pursuit was inconceivable, the war headed into a stalemate. In December 1900, the Alliance and Qing government opened negotiations, which led on September 7, 1901 to the signing of a peace treaty, the Boxer Protocol, which officially ended the war. Hawks in the Qing court had wanted to continue the war, but Cixi was enticed by the Alliance's promise that China would not be forced to cede more territory and that she would continue to rule China. Upon signing of the Boxer Protocol, most alliance forces withdrew from Beijing. In January 1902, the Qing court returned to Beijing to resume the country's administration. After the war, the Western powers moved away from confrontation and impositions on China and saw that allying with the Qing, as well as aiding the Chinese government rein in internal unrest, was necessary to protect their own interests. Meanwhile, Japan rose to ascendancy in East Asia and also increasingly began encroaching into China. For the Qing monarchy, the Boxer War was a military disaster as its efforts to modernize were exposed as a failure. But the Qing court remained in power and kept China from being dismembered, which had appeared imminent before the war. The Qing even gained assurances from the Western powers that they would respect China's political and territorial integrity. Ultimately, the greatest threat to the Qing monarchy emerged from southern China, long hostile to Manchu rule, where in 1911 a revolution led by Republican nationalists overthrew the Qing monarchy and ended 2,000 years of dynastic rule.